Okay, and happy Saturday, and welcome to episode 2 of the Hotel Havoc podcast. If you haven't listened to the first episode and aren't really sure what this is all about, the goal here is to get insight, opinions, and thoughts from individuals from various walks of life and different experiences. And while I tend to gravitate towards the military, defense, foreign policy spheres, etc., you can expect a wide variety of conversations and topics, so that's what's really exciting for me here. As a courtesy reminder, I do consider this podcast an 18-plus situation. I'm just too lazy to bleep out swear words, to be frank. So keep that in mind if for some odd reason you're torturing your kids while you're driving along on a long car drive and playing this. I don't know why you would do that, but to each their own. But there's your heads up. Today's episode is going to be really interesting. We're going to be focusing on the noticeable impact of commercial off-the-shelf drones on maneuver warfare. And I'm going to refer to that as COTs drones from here on out, COTS. Let me take a minute to introduce my two guests. Now, if you listen to the first episode, you already know my first guest, which is Live Faust Die Young. I'm going to call you Faust from here on out, of course. I'm not going to reread the entire bio. I will have this posted in the episode description. But just as a quick little reminder, Faust is a former Marine infantryman with a post-military background in small arms, light weapons, counterterrorism, and targeting as a U.S. government defense analyst. Your experience includes hands-on exploitation of enemy threat weapons and identification, attribution of weaponry, equipment to the nation or group using them. And more specifically and highly relevant for this is the small arms and light weapons, or SALW experience, which obviously with this topic is highly relevant. What's up, Faust? How you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back on, man.
Yeah, long time no talk. I feel like it was just yesterday, but here you are again. I'm going to continue to monopolize your time and eventually become a dirty word in your household. It's kind of the goal.
Okay, sounds good.
Let me move on to guest number 2. So next guest, new to the show, you go by the name of Matthew. Just want to clarify that. Before I read his bio, this is the one that Matthew gave to me. I didn't write this one myself, so let me just start as clean as I possibly can. So Matthew, you can find on Twitter under the username of at @IamTheWarax. And you are a, quote, hippopotamus appreciator, shitposter, and retired Marine Corps tank commander. So right off the bat, the latter two 100% make sense. They combine very well. Can you explain the hippopotamus part? I'm really, really curious.
I'm confused how you could be confused about it. The hippopotamus is such a majestic animal, and I think that the appreciation of them is something that just comes so naturally.
Is it the raw power? Like, what's the
raw physicality, but also the entertainment factor. Such a massive animal, and then to watch them bound through the water with such grace.
Okay, I mean, hey, that's fair. I mean, everyone's got.
I don't know why you're laughing. This is very serious.
It's no. I remember the first time when I saw your bio, I was like, wait, there's got to be a backstory, and I briefly scrolled through and I was like, oh my God, there's no backstory.
No, there's no backstory. That's it. Just like hippopotamuses. And I think It's very funny when people want me to, give a quote or go on a show and they want my bio. So sure, yeah, I'll do it. But you have to say I'm a hippopotamus appreciator.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, in our inevitable fall from grace when you're on CNN, you're going to have to explain that. So you may need an answer ready to go,
I'll send you something here in a second offline.
There we go. That works. Well, Matthew, I really appreciate you. We had a great chat the first time. Me, Faust, and Patrick Fox. We were talking about just like Taiwan, China, Ukraine, all that fun stuff, and it was a really interesting chat. And I wanted to talk to you guys per Faust's recommendation, just talking about these COTS drones and these dirt cheap drones and how they're just kind of completely changing the landscape. But before I do that, I have to ask both of you separately. And Faust, I'll start with you, and then Matthew, I'll ask you the exact same question. But what the hell happened yesterday? Like, what actually happened?
So I was telling you earlier, I was busy most of Friday, and so I was just kind of glancing at Twitter and thinking, this will all blow over because he's made these kind of bombastic statements before, Prigozhin, that is. So when I woke up Saturday morning and there were helicopters being shot down and an IL-22 had been downed, I had absolutely no idea what to think. And like I often recommend, I just started reading the people that do know those kind of things. And when they didn't know what was going on either, I just decided to sit back and watch the shit show. I mean, I had no relevant thoughts to offer, so it was just, how long can this go on? And really kind of shocked at how little public response there was from the Kremlin.
Yeah, I just okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. It's so confusing. Matthew, what about you, man? Like, what's your thought?
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course that's what happened. It makes perfect sense to set up a private, absolutely amoral mercenary army, and then put nothing between them and your capital. It's just another example of Putin being the master strategist that he is.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go on the record to say that the current theory that they're using it as a cover to send him to Belarus to potentially open the front again against Kiev. Why would you need to march tanks through Rostov to do that?
You
really
don't need to do that.
Yeah,
that's a very silly idea. I think that people try to look at these kinds of situations and find like a compelling logical answer, and there isn't. And I think that the reason that there isn't one is that these are just like bad people doing bad things, and they're all motivated by their internal, like whatever is best for them. So I think that Prigozhin found himself in a situation where he thought he was going to lose power, and he felt the only option that he had was to do something like this.
Yeah. Faust, you got something?
I was just going to say exactly what he said, that I think that the people are always looking for a logical, reasonable answer. Matt jokes about, Putin the master strategist, but there are enough people that really believe that he's truly brilliant. And I think the last 18 months plus have demonstrated that no, he's not. And if he is, choosing not to be, or choosing not to demonstrate that and allowing his generals to run everything. But I think the real answer is that he's just not as smart as we thought he was, and he was deceived on how capable his military actually is. Right.
So what you're saying is this was not a plot by Joe Biden to distract from the Hunter Biden saga. That's what you're saying definitively here.
I did love how many people were willing to show their ass with saying that yesterday.
Jesus. So,
nothing could distract me from that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I was still posting memes. I didn't stop. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. God. $6.4 billion sent through Venmo. Then they just took it and ran, and we were like, "Oh no, where goes our money?" Dumb. Anyway, we could talk all day about that one, but yeah, it like you guys said, it was just such a strange situation, and I'm not even sure what comes next. None of it makes any sense. But I suspect we won't really learn for at least a few years what actually happened yesterday.
Well, I don't think that we're done either. I think that was the first thing that happened, right? So we have the convoy, the march or attack or whatever you want to call it in the direction of Moscow. And now we're going to have to wait and see what is the government, what is Putin, what are the rest of the factions, like what is their real response going to be? I think one of the weirdest things about, was it yesterday or today? I don't even know. That was yesterday, right? Yeah. So the weirdest thing is, where is Gerasimov during all of this? Why, where is he? We saw other generals go on television and denounce what was happening. We got a statement from Putin calling them traitors. But where is the Ministry of Defense? Where is the head of the army? Why haven't they weighed in? Where are they?
Right.
So I think that is really going to play. I'm sure that we're not the only ones that noticed that, right? Like, I think Putin is probably going to have questions about, like, hey, dudes, where were you? What were you doing while our helicopters are being shot down, while I'm being made a fool of, and while the Russian Air Force is bombing highways? I mean, it's out of control. It's crazy.
Yeah, those two, the generals doing the video in that same room, and one of them had the I forget what weapon it was. It looked like a submachine gun in his hand, like under the table. That was so bizarre. That was really, really weird.
You get the impression that dude got like dragged out of bed drunk. Like somebody was like, "Hey guys,"
and they handed him a weapon. They're like, "Maybe hold on to this."
Yeah.
Weird.
Okay. Let's calm everybody down. What can we do? Oh, I know. Let's get the general drunk as shit on television, holding a PP-2000 submachine gun
That's what it
to
was.
make like an incoherent speech. That should settle everyone's nerves. I think that's what we need.
Alexander Clarkson is one of the guys I really respect on Twitter, and I tease him a lot because for every historical event or every event that happens, he finds a historical event in the past and draws comparisons to it. And I joke with him about it because anytime something happens, I'm like, what 17th century Baltic example is he going to use for this? But he made some pretty compelling points yesterday that generally when an event like this happens, it's not that it's the beginning of the end, but that it is the beginning of a weakening in structural changes in a way that you're just not going to be able to predict. And some of what he was saying is that likely Putin never returns to the position of strength that he was in prior to this. And of course, it's total conjecture, and I don't have the background to say, oh yeah, that's correct. But it was an interesting starting point to think about, and but an interesting framework to think, if there are more signs of weakening, like does that tell us that the end is coming? Because I don't think this tells us definitively anything. It just tells us that the Kremlin is even more disordered than we thought it was.
Right.
It tells us that the elites are making moves, but yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't mean that this is the end of Putin. It doesn't mean that this is the end of the Russian Federation. It's a beginning of something else, because previously Putin has maintained power by being above all of these warring factions, right? He's the arbiter. He settles these disputes between his lieutenants, for a lack of a better term. But now, what Prigozhin did that is different is, beyond his weird videos that he's been doing, which I've really enjoyed. It's like he wants to be like a Twitch streamer, right? Like, it's very strange. But he's gone beyond this challenging rhetoric where he doesn't directly name Putin. He's, directed towards the Ministry of Defense. But he mentioned the president yesterday. He said that the president was lied to. He's been deceived. And it seems like they were going towards Moscow. And to do that completely changes everything that we've seen before, where it was okay for the subordinates to attack each other, but never the president, never, Russia itself. And that's now off the table. He's now shown that the Russian state is either unwilling or unable to keep its subordinates in line. So I don't know. It's very different, and I don't think that there's anybody who can say that they know what's going to come next.
Yeah, and that's personally why I don't buy this. I don't currently buy this theory that Putin was using this as a way to find out who wasn't loyal. Because the optics are horrible. They're horrible optics. Like I
looks
just
weak.
Yeah, and like the FSB, they've done this before. They've done this quiet. Like they kind of know what they're doing when it comes to that stuff. Like Russia's usually been pretty good at finding out who's not loyal internally. I don't buy this whole song and dance was just for that. I think that I think that's the cover for sure. There's so much to that we won't know. Like we were saying again, I'm not even an expert on Russia. I haven't been following Russia for years. I've always been more focused on the actual pacing threat, which is China. Russia's kind of that regional declining power, but still, I'm still baffled.
I have appreciated all the Russia experts that I do listen to have pretty much in lockstep all come out and said, we simply don't know right now. And what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to make predictions right now would be immature and irresponsible.
Yep.
It makes me feel a little bit better about how little I understand. That the guys and girls who really understand it are like, listen, we don't know, and that should probably be a queuing event for other people.
You'd think?
Yeah, it won't be though, so don't worry.
I was gonna say we went from deep water submarine experts to Russian coup experts. Tomorrow
the Prigozhin understanders have logged on.
Yeah, tomorrow there'll be some event that will happen. It's the usual deal. As long as you have access to a keyboard, you're basically an SME. That's why I take my That's why I take me being a dumbass so proudly, because it's easier. I don't have to pretend to be smart about anything. Just be honest about it. We'll circle around maybe in a few weeks and see what happens, and might be worth following up on another chat just to talk about what we learned.
We'll see who's executed and who's not, and then we'll know kind of what happened.
Yeah, we will. Well, appreciate your thoughts on that. Let me circle back now to the topic and just complete tone change. So, COTS drones, commercial off the shelf. The rise in the use of COTS drones has been rapidly changing the tactical and you could argue the strategic landscape in war zones around the world. And while I was, Faust, you suggested this, and it was a great suggestion because I was doing a little bit of research, and I had actually forgotten about this, but at one point during the Battle of Mosul, this was when Iraqi forces were trying to take Mosul back from ISIS, and this is actually when I was in Iraq training the Iraqi Bridge Regiment that this happened. But I believe it was SOCOM or maybe just the Special Forces unit that was there, actually admitted to a lapse in tactical superiority of the airspace to ISIS, because during the battle and during the lead up, and I obviously probably a little bit after to an extent, ISIS was launching these swarms of very, very, very cheap COTS drones that were attacking U.S., not so much U.S., but Iraqi troops on the ground. And that was one of the articles that I sent you guys so you can take a read. I'll post the article in the description for the podcast as well. But that alone, that was back in 2016. I don't think many people actually realize that was the harbor, the hints that things were going to change. And for us to admit, I appreciate that was admitted, though. I appreciate that we said up front we lost control of the tactical airspace. I mean, that's a terrifying thought for any of us. All three of us have been on the ground in nasty areas. That's a pretty scary thought. So, with that story about Iraq, I want to hear what your immediate thoughts are about that and kind of get your big picture point of view. And I'll start with you, Faust. That's okay?
Yeah, man. So I had been, following that to some extent in Syria, and then of course it got picked up in Iraq. I think the same year. I think it was 2015 was the first time it happened. Somebody will correct me if not. When a Syrian rebel group I want to say it was northwest Syria, posted a video of them dropping just a very crude rudimentary munition. And then other groups started picking it up. And at the time, I kind of thought it was not a flash in the pan, but I thought this was going to be relatively limited. I think, honestly, when it started happening in Mosul was the inflection point for me where I realized this is not just a tool of terrorism. This is going to be a thing. So, like, ISIS is using them in Iraq to kind of limited effect. They're scary. They're getting a couple infantrymen here and there. But it wasn't until the first video where I saw one of those 40 mics with the badminton tail on it that we all laughed at, hit a Humvee and caused it to sympathetically detonate. I mean, the thing just disappeared. That it kind of, and then they did that several more times. That it really kind of clicked for me that this is not just a tool of insurgents or terrorists. Any swinging dick with a drone and a $50 HEDP round can now take out a significant portion of the world's armored vehicles. I mean, almost anything that isn't a main battle tank, and sometimes even main battle tanks, can be knocked out by just anybody with a drone and a very cheap grenade. And I think something that happened when the war kicked off in Ukraine was a lot of commentators saw the drones as an ad hoc response to a lack of organic air support or artillery, which I think is true. I think that was something that they did because they didn't have lots of air support and artillery. But, if tomorrow Ukraine grew an air force and just established total artillery dominance, I think only an insane person would say, okay, so the drones are going away now. No, I think they're here for good. And I think it took us a while to kind of make that realization. I think there was a prevailing belief that this was a flash in the pan, but I think this war has demonstrated that these are just not going away ever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a great quote again from the General Raymond Thomas, who was in the special operations unit that was involved in Mosul. And he said, I would not go to sleep on this enemy yet. And he didn't just mean ISIS. He was talking about the COTS drone threat. And again, that was some significant foreshadowing, no doubt. But Matthew, what about you, man? What do you think?
I don't really have much to add besides what Faust has already said. Drones are not my area of expertise. They're very different from hippopotamuses. But, I do recall the first time that I saw them being used operationally, probably 2015, 16, seeing rebel groups attacking I believe it was the Saudi army, just strapping explosives onto very cheap off-the-shelf drones, and it works, right? And I think that there was a lot of derision towards it at first because it sounds silly, but it works, and it does allow you to, in a very inexpensive way, replicate a pretty high dollar kind of weapon system, right? Because it is guided, it is expendable, and it is effective. So I think that these are absolutely not going to go away. It's going to continue to be a threat, and it has to be one that is taken seriously.
Yeah, no question. And I shared an article earlier with both of you that at least the U.S. military seems to be taking it seriously enough, and shockingly, I think early enough that we're actually getting at least trying to get ahead of the game before we see it on the battlefield. But the Striker vehicles that are getting equipped with drone killing weaponry, some of it electric, some of it kinetic, is a sign, like you said, that we have to take it seriously. And it's just baffling, or it's not baffling, but it's interesting that these $2,000 cheap drones are requiring $1 million upgrades to vehicles, but it's just necessary to keep the troops alive, and it's just completely changing how we're going to look at the next conflict, especially involving, God forbid, involving U.S. or NATO forces. I hope we're learning a lot of lessons. I really do.
It seems like we are. I think that it's the U.S. military, has a mixed record of adapting to change. And I think that drones is one where it seems like we are getting it right. When I was deployed in 2013 to Afghanistan, our loaders, Lance corporals on the tanks were trained to operate reconnaissance drones. And we did have these drones attached to the unit organically. They were ours. We never used them. I think it was early enough in the idea of having drones that were organic to a unit that there was like a fear of losing them. So I'm trying to think. I don't think we ever took them out a single time. But I think that in such a short time to go from that, where you have like a real reticence to even use the equipment because you're afraid you're going to break it or lose it, and to now have the Marine Corps standing up its own, UAV units that are specifically, dedicated to operating larger systems, and then pushing down these reconnaissance type drones to infantry platoons and squads, shows that people are paying attention and it is being taken seriously.
Yeah, sure. Faust, did you have something?
Oh yeah, I was going to draw a comparison. Anybody who's served in Iraq or Afghanistan is familiar with SV bids, and for my first deployment, I would say was 2006, 2007 to Iraq. We got hit with one, and it was pretty devastating. But it was a threat that we understood. It was a threat we knew how to handle, and it was something that they used in one-off attacks. They weren't conducting a 50-man assault with the SV bid. Fast forward to ISIS, who is using them at a strategic level. They are sending waves of SV bids and breaking defensive lines. And I remember the U.S. response when the U.S. deployed to Syria was very much a scary one. You saw a number of videos of them firing javelins and like having seconds to hit. But it was one that we eventually learned we have to take this very seriously. And it's not as though if ISIS had smart missiles, they wouldn't have used those. They used what they had at the time. Granted, we don't need to come up with or adopt suicide vehicle bombs. That's never going to be an issue for us. But I do think that there is reticence to adopt drone dropped munitions, because I think that there is this view that that's just below us, or that we don't need that because we have the smart munitions. And I feel like everything about this war is telling us it would be a huge mistake not to get started on it now, even if we're not saying, here you go, Lance Corporal, here's a $500 drone with a $50 munition on it. Like, at least beginning the thought process of not just the recon drones and the downing of drones, but the actual, cheap drones that drop munitions that can be lost as easily as an AT-4 or a tow missile. I think that it has to get to that point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's actually one of the things that I'm concerned about personally. Like, obviously we have like the squad level mini drones. What are they? The Black Hornets. I think Marines have the Black Hornets as well, I assume. But you're right. We don't have why don't we have a squad level capability to drop, like you said, a 40 millimeter? That to me seems like a no brainer. And I feel like we really need to take a step back and look into doing that. And I might be speaking out of turn. Maybe that is being looked into, but we have grenadiers on infantry platoons and whatnot, so there's no reason we can't do something similar with a small handheld drone. I mean, it seems like it would be a common sense use, and like you said, we're seeing videos every day of drone strikes from handheld drone strikes on trenches and clearing out trenches and hard points. We're probably too late, but now is the time to really consider it and make it happen.
Yeah, I don't think it's too late. I think that because that is an off-the-shelf system, it would be something that's very easy to catch up on, and I think that it is a good solution to the issue of defeating enemy armor. Where you have like the arms race, right, between the weapon and the defense. But you don't have to destroy a tank's armor to stop it. You just have to kill the people inside. And so if you're able to take an off-the-shelf drone and drop a grenade through a hatch, the tank is out of the fight, as much as if you would hit it with $1 million, traditional anti-tank guided missile. I think that it has to be something that is being looked at seriously, because it's just such a game changer.
Right, and it's been interesting to watch them, disable a tank and then follow up by dropping a drone dropped grenade down the hatch to actually put it out of commission permanently. It's an interesting team up there. Makes sense. Makes perfect sense to do so.
I was just going to say the dropping the thing through the hatch is something that still boggles my mind this far into the war. Why they're not I get you in a ditch in a hurry, and if that's on fire, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. But when they're ditching because they hit an anti-tank mine, not just taking the time. I mean, just turning a handle and throwing the hatch back down.
Close your hatch.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it has to be a training issue. At the beginning of the war, I thought that the Russian tank crews would be well trained. But time and time again, we saw them doing things that just defy logic, right? Tanks should not drive into mud. And over and over and over again, we saw the Russians just drive them, not just into mud, but into lakes, into rivers, and then the tank is disabled. So the thing about shutting your hatch in a tank is, an experienced crew can close the hatch and fight from the inside of the tank using the optics, using communication, with your wingman and with adjacent units to know what is happening around you. But if you are ass at communicating and you are not confident in your ability to fight from closed or we call it open protected, where the hatch is pretty much closed but you can still peek out, then I get it. Yeah, I understand why they're not closing the hatch, because they probably don't have the level of training that is necessary to do that with confidence and be effective.
Yeah,
that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Why these dudes, almost 2 years in, are still just rolling around with their hatches wide open in a combat area.
Yeah, I've tried to jettison any common sense approach to how we look at anything anymore. Nothing makes sense to me. I'm so confused by just everything that's happening. I feel like we did trigger a matrix reset when Harambe died. Everything's just gone to shit since then. I don't understand anything. I don't.
That does seem accurate. Yes.
Oh man. Anyway, so it actually is a good segue. Just PSA. So let's just be real, right? The three of us, we could admit there's a level of bias, right? We're obviously, we've been following the Ukraine war effort and we've been kind of rooting for them since the start. But I am genuinely curious if this is just me. We've seen both sides adapt to an extent when it comes to the use of COTs drones on the offense and also on the defense. But, and again, this might be biased. I try not to be biased as best I can, but it's inevitable to an extent. I feel like Ukraine has been a lot more aggressive in its use of COTs drones than Russia has. I feel like I see a significant amount more videos of them actually using them to clear trenches, and I've seen a few, of course, of Ukraine forces getting hit by small drones, but it seems like it's really heavily one way. Is that just me, or am I just stuck in an echo chamber?
I would mostly agree with you. I think that we don't get to see the whole picture because we're mostly seeing Ukrainian footage or footage that is curated by pro-Ukrainian folks. So I think we're going to see less of the successful hits, but the sheer magnitude of the drops that are happening suggests that, it's overwhelmingly the Ukrainian side that has made the adaptation to this. And I think the Ukrainians have been the first ones for each echelon of new way to do things. They were the first ones to operationalize drone drop munitions, and they had experimented with that before the war. Going back to 2021, they were working on those RKG 6400, I think is what they call it. It's an RKG 3, the anti-tank grenade that they were dropping. That was before the war even started.
Yep.
Then Russia kind of slowly started doing similar. Then Ukraine started doing it with thermals. Then the FPV drones. And now Ukraine is using FPV drones as bombers. They're releasing munitions and returning to base. And I certainly think the evidence shows that Ukraine is more effective with it and certainly more prolific with it. And I think some of that just comes down to a lack of stovepiping and probably a considerably less corrupt government just in general. Like, I think the means for Russia to get this is from fundraising, and that's it.
Yeah. What I don't understand are the piles of landmines that they keep leaving in the open and they're getting bombs dropped on them. I saw you comment on one of those recently. It was a literal pile of mines sitting on by the road, and the drone got picked up in the explosion. But
that was the 5th time this month I've seen that.
Yeah, me too. It's insane. I don't get it. Anyway, Matthew, go ahead.
The thing is that mines get lonely if you leave them alone, so it's always best to store them in a big pile.
So they're a herd creature.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Like
it's actually it's inhumane actually to leave them by themselves for any extended period of time.
Wait, is it hippopotami or is it hippopotamuses?
I go back and forth between them, but I think that hippopotami sounds funnier.
Okay, yeah, me too. Let's roll with that. I'll write to National Geographic and make sure it happens.
Good.
So you're an officer. I'm just trying to imagine what your response would be if you told your guys, you're like, hey, we're going to need these mines soon. Can you go ahead and unload them off the truck? And you came back and there was just a massive pile of them out in the open, not even covered with branches or anything. Like, as a sergeant, I would have absolutely lost my mind.
Yeah. No. I mean, no. I try to wrap my head around it. Go ahead, Matt.
No, that's it. That was my comment. It's not great. Not ideal.
Yeah. Because you're an officer too, aren't you? You are a tank commander.
I was a sergeant.
Oh, so I'm the only shitbird here.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was in good company. All right, I get it.
Nope. No, you are alone, brother.
Okay. All right. Let me use some smaller words and shorter sentences then from here on out.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
No, I'm just kidding. I have to give you shit, but yeah, no, I've had extreme anxiety by some of the shit that's going on, especially like we've talked about that battalion level bridging exercise that went haywire and they lost, what was it, like 30 some tanks into that water. That gave me some severe anxiety as an ex-bridge commander. I mean, I just can't.
It's not great. It's not great. Not ideal.
Yeah, but yeah, beyond that, like there's still stupid mistakes like that happening, but there has been at least a level of adaptation across the board. But yeah, like again, we're all acknowledging that there's bias. It happens, but I would bet money that Ukraine has been a little bit more aggressive about the use of the COTs drones, because I believe they were doing that day one, February 24th. I believe that was part of the reason that the drive to Kiev started to go haywire as well, because I think they were getting spotted and then counter batteried right away, and what have you.
It was within the first 5 days that I saw the first, I'm going to butcher this name, Rozvidka.
It's better than I would do it.
They were one of the drone units. They've been probably one of the more prolific drone units, but it was within the first 5 days that I saw the first of their videos, and an effective video too. I would say one thing that I would note on Russia's side is that they have adapted their electronic warfare to the threat of drones, to the point that, I mean, we've seen numerous reports of Ukrainians saying, we can't push more than 2 kilometers where we used to be able to go 10. Because the EW presence, and maybe they're having more success with the drone guns now than they were. Mm-hmm. But Russia seems a bit more responsive on the EW side, less responsive on the attack-focused side. Yeah. And of course, Russia's making tremendous use of their state-manufactured drones. I mean, we've heard plenty of stories. The Orlan is janky as all get out, but like it works. and it's cueing their other the Lancet drones and their kamikaze drones in a way that certainly wish they weren't that successful with them.
Sure, Matthew.
No, I've got nothing.
Okay.
I think. Yep.
No, I saw you go off mute, so I'm just assuming that's all good. No, you're right though. That's another thing that we're lacking on our side. We don't have. I believe the Russians operate company level EW units. Am I correct in that? I haven't looked in a while.
I'm unsure at what echelon they're attached, but I mean, they certainly have large amounts of it. I mean, just judging from the number of EW systems that have been struck or captured, like they're sending large numbers of them into theater.
Yeah, that's something that's bothered me for a few years. I feel like I know we started. There was some kind of unit, quasi unit, I believe, that was in the Army that got stood up, and they were kind of tiptoeing into it. But we really don't have an equivalent because, again, we rely on our growlers or whatever's going to replace the growler to do the EW job for us. But I still wonder if, in the rise of these drones, if we need to do a like you said, a unit level, whether a company, platoon, whatever, EW asset to prevent these kinds of attacks.
So are you familiar with the MRZR, the MRZR, the little Polaris?
Yeah. Yep.
So have you seen the pictures of those with the EW suites attached?
Yeah, but just for the sake of those who aren't familiar, if you can just kind of dive into that, that'd be great.
Sure. So it's a UTV that the Marine Corps and the Army have adopted. I think the Army has a 6-seater and the Marine Corps has a 4-seater. Someone will correct if I'm wrong, but both the Army and the Marine Corps, I've seen images of them training where they have this EW radome on it, and I'm terrible at actually understanding how EW works, but I can generally spot the equipment when I see it. And initially, I thought it's just a counter IED jammer, but from the description of the article, it was talking about, no, this is meant for all types of EW, specifically learning how to use it against drones. And then the new Army MSHORAD, I think, has some form of EW capability on it. There definitely feels like they're acknowledging that this is a thing. And I feel like in some areas they're accelerating this, the Army MSHORAD, and then there's a JLTV one that also, in addition to its cannon and other physical ways to defeat drones, I believe it's either a high energy laser or some sort of EW suite. So there's areas where we're advancing on this, but I don't think it's gotten down to the infantry squad, who's probably going to be one of the prime customers.
Right. Yeah, that's my take as well. And I need to brush up on that. I've seen a few different, like I said, there were some striker based ones, but I just don't know how far along they are. And I don't know if they're on the same level that our peers or our near peers are doing. The U.S. has always operated with a heavier Air Force, and we put a lot of priorities in our Air Forces. So maybe we can mitigate on the same level, but obviously not in the small drone, area. Let's take a trip down memory lane, for better or for worse. And what I want to know, and I'm curious to hear your guys' impact. I imagine you both had very different deployment experiences, very different from mine. But let's assume you're back on deployment, right? And you're encountering this type of warfare that's evolving for the first time. And looking back, how would you have adapted to it? Like, if you got put in those shoes that the Ukrainians or the Russians even are in right now, how would you yourself have adapted? And Faust, I know you were in Iraq for a bit. I saw you mention some very specific battles that you were involved in, but feel free to pick whichever one you're comfortable with. But if you can give me just a general idea, like how would you have adapted as you were?
So I should clarify that I was in Rutba when I was in Iraq, and I don't know that I would characterize any part of that as a battle.
Sure.
More like, yeah. But let's go with that. That was 2006. So if this technology magically showed up then, and the enemy was dropping munitions on us from drones, I think it would have been an immediate showstopper. It would throw me off, quite frankly, and I don't have a clue what we would have done at the time, because at the time we had a minimal way of stopping anything electronic. I assume that the first step would be, JIDO or whatever organization, DITRA, trying to adapt the IED jammers that were everywhere at the time to do similar work. But beyond that, I assume we would have done the same thing Marines and soldiers were doing in the counter ISIS campaign: shoot at them,
yep,
and hope for the best. And I think there would have been a lot of casualties. And I don't think that the U.S. government moves quickly enough, even when it's a time of crisis, to be able to rapidly field a response to that. And I think we can move quite quickly when compelled to, but I think you'd still have multi-months and service members would die during that time.
Sure.
And I think we would have had to react the same way that the Russians and Ukrainians are. You just accept that there's going to be a level of people who die from that until you can come up with a solution.
Yeah, and you kind of nailed it, because that same General Thomas that we talked about, who was in Mosul, or talked about Mosul, mentioned in that article that the Iraqi offensive into Mosul almost came to a complete halt, because at one point there were over 70 drones in the air at the same time, and the only way that they could combat them was to shoot them with small arms. So I'm not quite sure how they overcame it. I think I'm not looking at it now, but they eventually brought in some EW support, and they started to attack the drone operators' networks. But you're right. What can you do except for shoot at it, and then maybe keep an eye on the sky from there on out?
There's a quote from, it's either 2017 or 2018, where a colonel was reviewing positions in Iraq, and he asked this Marine, he said, "Marine, tell me what you know about your counter-UAS plan." And the Marine picked up a shotgun and said, "Here it is, sir." And everyone latched onto it because it was funny, but that was literally it. It was, we're going to shoot at it with small arms.
What can you do? Matthew, so you have a different perspective, I assume, as a tank commander, right? What was your deployment experience? You mentioned Afghanistan, correct? Were you anywhere else?
That's correct. No, I was in Afghanistan. That's right.
Okay, so yeah, same question to you. What the hell would you do?
Probably die. I think, yeah, it's probably what we would have done. The Marine Corps never had many tanks to begin with. They have 0 now, but there was one company of tanks in Afghanistan at any time, and a tank is always a priority target, right? Like the people who we were fighting were always trying to destroy the tanks. So I think that if they had a weapon like that, they definitely would have used it against us, and we would not have been prepared to deal with it. Like the anti-air plan for a tank is to fire the machine guns at it. But maybe you'd hit it, but probably not, especially if it was something that you were not prepared to fight against, especially if it was something that was coming, attacking from, well, you're not looking in the air, right? There was no air threat in Afghanistan at any time.
Right.
So we wouldn't have been looking up there. We would not have expected it, and would not have been prepared to defend ourselves from something like that. So, I agree with Faust. I think a lot of people would have died. I think a lot of people would have been badly wounded. And I think that honestly, the reaction would have been to withdraw tanks from combat until there was some way to counter that. Whether it's going after the operators or bringing in some kind of low altitude air defense unit to give us cover.
Sure.
Ironically enough, we all shit on the cope cages, and they clearly failed to stop, heat warheads from above. But they're still there. A lot of tanks still have them, and I've seen numerous videos where they go to drop a munition on it, and they can't get into open hatches, or they can only get to the driver's compartment and can't actually disable it. It does make me wonder if the reason that they're retaining those is because of the drone threat.
Yeah,
or just idiots. Who knows?
No, I mean, I think you're right. It has to be, because obviously they're not going to stop a javelin, as we've seen. They seem to go right through. But Dale, my NCOs that I recorded an episode yesterday with him. He reminded me, and I kind of briefly forgot about this, but when we were in Syria, we had 5 Mat Vs and 1 Humvee that we procured to do our job, which was not enough. But at one point, we did actually put, it was mostly for shade, to be blunt with you, but we actually did have top covers on those. And I had actually forgotten that leading up to that, there had been reports about ISIS using drones. And I don't recall specifically them saying that they were dropping bombs on us, but they were definitely using commercial off-the-shelf drones to recon at a minimum. There had been reports about grenades being dropped in Raqqa a little bit. So we had some cages up top, which wouldn't have stopped anything. Hell, I don't know if it would have stopped the 40 millimeter if it dropped on our heads, but it was something, and you're right. I don't know. It's probably the reason. That's probably it. It looks dumb and it looks sillier when a javelin punches through it, but I think I'd probably rather have that too than something drop down an open hatch and detonate from inside. See that turret go flying.
I think it's also good to at least let your guys feel like you're doing something, right? So like, hey guys, like we've got this, and like, sure, it's not going to stop a javelin, but it offers some level of protection. Because I think that maintaining morale is probably a round the clock issue for these folks.
Yeah, that's actually a really,
so
really
you
good
gotta
point.
do what you can.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to cut you off. No, you're 100% right. It's a great point. I don't think many people think from that perspective, and you're right. I mean, from a commander's perspective, I'd rather do something than nothing. Even if I don't know if it's gonna be a winner, I'd rather do something. And in our experience, that was why we used MAT-Vs. The other option was to use Humvees at the time because there was nothing in Syria, and I was like, hell no, we're not doing that. I'm not playing that game with Humvees when there's IEDs everywhere. But my experience was similar to yours. We built bridges in the middle of nowhere, and I'm sure you've seen it, but engineering units and bridge units especially, we take up a lot of real estate, and we operate a large footprint, and we have security. In fact, we had Marines doing our security at the time to make sure we didn't have any uninvited guests. But we did a briefing on the potential threat of small drones that would come in and try to interrupt the bridge build, whether target the what we consider the critical vehicles, like the crane. We had a 40-ton crane that lifted some of the heavier bits, and the actual bridge pieces themselves, which at the time were not super easily replaceable. And we didn't really have an answer for it. Like you guys said, it was small arms. Just shoot at it. That's all we can do. Just shoot at it. All we can do, again, going forward, we can hope that we're learning the right lessons and we start adapting the right way. To be determined. So why don't we talk about learning lessons then? We're obviously observing the war. Everyone's watching it. To imagine that we aren't learning lessons and the Russians aren't learning some lessons at the same time is imagine neither of us are actually learning is silly. We're obviously all paying attention. From your guys' perspective, what changes do we need to make right now, today or yesterday, really? And that is whether it's related to industry, manufacturing, and we've kind of touched on tactics, but let's just focus on industry, manufacturing, and maybe some 10,000 foot view on how we need to change how we operate daily. Faust, let's start with you. What do you think?
To hit the high points, ATGMs need to be everywhere. Cheap drones you can lose need to be everywhere. EW needs to be everywhere. Air defense needs to be everywhere. And I think that last one is one that we just continue to kind of ignore because, as you've touched on, we're so confident in our Air Force. But I think, a prolonged war with a China or Russia, even a battered Russia, it does not begin with us having immediate air superiority. It begins with us not having air superiority because the air defense grid is so vast and massive. And I think there needs to be an understanding that unless we have the option to sit it out until the air attacks are complete and their air defense is degraded, that we will have ground troops in combat with the threat of enemy air over top of us, not just drones and missiles, but until their air defense is neutralized. And I mean, bear in mind, it took 35 days for us to do that during the Gulf War against a much less complex foe. The enemy may not give us that choice to just sit there and wait it out. The enemy may force the fight. And so I really worry that we aren't investing enough in mobile air defense that can actually go with the attacking forces. And we just have this belief that the Air Force will always be there.
So you're so kind of like the Avengers, the Humvee mounted Avengers. That's what you're thinking?
Yeah. Or in longer range. We traditionally don't go for mobile long range SAMs. But I mean, it's very nerve wracking to think that, a war with China, which hopefully never happens, that it could take us weeks to degrade their air defense before we have persistent air support over our troops.
Right.
And especially looking at it from a Marine perspective of the Pacific, the assumption is you just won't have air superiority initially, and you will be subjected to enemy air attacks. And squaring that circle needs to be happening now.
Yeah. I'm drawing a blank. This is a question for both of you guys. Are we operating any close range anti-air weapons that aren't missile based? Kind of like the German, oh man, what's it called? The double barreled.
No, the Gepard.
Yeah, that. We're not operating anything like that, are we?
I mean, we have the Sea Whiz.
Yeah, true. But
no, nothing heavy.
Nothing mobile. That's what I thought. Like I said, I kind of drew a blank. I was like, wait, hold on. I could have sworn that we weren't, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't talking out of my ass.
We used to operate multiple types of it, and I think the Army still has the M113 based with a Vulcan on it. But they may have retired that. I know the Marine Corps retired the LEV air defense variants, which had the rotary cannon and then Stinger missiles. Those are gone.
It's been a while since
I think they also stood down LAD.
I was gonna say it's been a while since I've seen either of them, but granted, they could probably yank him out of retirement if we needed. But I almost wonder if we should just because like they seem to be super effective against those Iranian drones, at least from some of the videos I've seen. So it just feels like we probably need to revive a non-missile based close air defense platform, mobile platform of some type.
I think that Faust covered everything that I would have said operationally. I think that the industrial base needs to have a hard look taken at it. You know, which of these components for drones are being built overseas? Where are the bottlenecks? You know, what is going to prevent us from scaling up production in the event that these systems are needed in large numbers and are being expended in large numbers too? Because there's a meaningful difference between building something and then being able to replace them, right?
Right.
So I think that now, there is a question of the capacity of the industrial base to maintain all of these weapon systems and the ammunition and the parts in a war where there will be losses that are much higher than what we have been used to, even fighting in Vietnam or Korea, where the casualties and vehicle losses were much higher than we experienced in the last 22 years of the global war on terror, or however long it lasted, if it is even over now. So I think that is, one of the more uncomfortable questions that doesn't seem to get the attention that it deserved, really, until very recently, when this war between Ukraine and Russia that I think nearly everyone, myself included, thought would be over and decided very quickly, instead turned out into this long, drawn-out slug match where Russia is losing not an unprecedented number of vehicles, but pretty damn close. To lose the amount of equipment that they are losing is not something that anybody who's in the military now, has seen in their lifetime. And this is something from like 40s set piece battles where you're losing, I think Oryx claims like 4,000 vehicles have been destroyed now, tanks.
Yep.
Like that's nuts. It's
too.
Almost impossible to conceive of the value of those. Like there's the dollar value of that vehicle, right? But to actually turn around and now have to pay for it and replace it, it's nuts. Russia will not be able to recover for decades, in my opinion, from the losses that they have incurred.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I just don't see how they. I mean, it depends too, I guess, on how long sanctions are upheld and whatnot. There are obviously a bunch of reports going around. There was one today I saw that. Oh man, it kind of made me cringe a little bit because it implied. I forget who posted it. I won't even name them if I remembered, but it implied that Russia would be running out of their Kinzhal, the hypersonics, and that's why over the last couple of weeks there's been a noticeable drop in Kinzhal strikes because they're having trouble sourcing the components for it because most of them are coming from the West, like chips and what. And I remember early on people were saying, "Yeah, they're running out of missiles." I was like, I don't know about all that, but it does make me wonder, given like the tank turnaround too. Because they've claimed they were going to put out like 300 tanks every couple months recently. I was like, no way, no. There's no way, no way.
They're all going to be Armada also.
Oh God,
they'll be on the streets of Kiev,
which still has yet to make
Tuesday.
an appearance. I haven't even seen an image of that firing from. They said they were going to use it almost like an artillery platform. I haven't seen anything.
I don't think that vehicle works. From the first time that it was debuted, I don't think that it's a real vehicle. I think that it's a technology demonstrator. I could go off into a whole other segment about Armada and why it's bullshit.
I'm going to take a note on that because I'm going to hold you to that.
The very short story is that Russia lacks the industrial capacity to actually build that vehicle.
I have it on good assurance that the breakdown during the parade was to demonstrate its recoverability. Okay.
Yeah, that makes good sense because that's really what you want to highlight is the competency of your mechanics and recovery vehicles.
Yeah, that's why when I bought my truck, I rammed it into a wall because I wanted to make sure the airbags worked. So
precisely, and you want to demonstrate that to your family to build that confidence in the platform. See, like, look, honey, I know I've crashed it into the house, but I'm okay. And at the end of the day, isn't that what matters the most?
Yeah. I'm going to hold off on a tank. I have a tank related question, but Faust, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I was going to just completely in agreement that that's something that needs to be looked at is the robustness of our defense industry to replace losses. Something we're definitely very proud of in the West is how survivable our vehicles are, and it's being demonstrated in Ukraine with just how many of those vehicles got knocked out and the crews survived. But those vehicles got knocked out and they now have to be replaced. And I think we have lost kind of the scale of what intensive war looks like. In Vietnam, 5,000 U.S. aircraft were lost, and a lot of those were to non-combat. But I mean, 5,000. Imagine the U.S. or anyone in the West having to replace 5,000 helicopters and Raptors and F-35s. That's unfathomable. When we talk about the 1,000 plus F-35s we want to acquire, we talk about that in like 5 to 10 year increments. And I do think that, the U.S. is fortunate to have deep stockpiles of a number of our vehicles, of Abrams and Bradleys, but a lot of our vehicles are not going to have deep stockpiles of replacements. There's only so many Patriot batteries in the entire world. There's only so many, EW vehicles in the U.S. Like, those aren't things that we deeply stockpile in the desert. And so that massive attrition, even if the crews are surviving, they still need a new ride. And the ability to replace that and replace it rapidly is something that I am personally concerned about.
Even with the stockpile of Abrams, we did. I think we made 8,000 of them or something like that. I may have just made that number up. But it is many thousands of Abrams were built, but they're not being built anymore. And if you need to replace those, that's not just about starting the plant back up. It's about finding people who know how to build an Abrams tank, to train people how to build an Abrams tank. And that's before you're even talking about any of the raw materials that go into it. It is a complicated vehicle, and this stuff takes time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the downsides that we have, right? So, like, the Russians can put out 1 million T-62s, T-72s, and we can put out thousands of Abrams, but a lot of our equipment vehicles especially are very technologically advanced, and that can be a downside because they're harder to replace and build. I mean, in World War II, we pumped out, the B-24 Liberator was the most produced aircraft in the United States, and it was, I don't even want to quote the number, it was hundreds of thousands in a crazy amount of time.
Yeah, it's something that we need to be seriously looking at because otherwise we will get caught with our pants down, needing all of this stuff and having no way to deliver it.
Yep. I also think we should open our minds to, purchasing European-made vehicles as well. We seem to be very reluctant to do that in some capacities. There's plenty of good platforms out there, but I don't know. It's a complicated situation. But that kind of brings me to the tank question then. The Abrams X. Can you explain that to me?
What needs explaining?
Is it? What's the goal of it? Is it a lighter Abrams? Is that the main goal?
Are you talking about Abrams X, or are you talking about the Booker, the Army's new light tank?
No, not the M10 Booker. I love the M10 Booker. That's a whole other conversation as well. But that Abrams X, that was like electric and apparently a lighter turret, I believe. I'm quoting off the top of my head. I was trying to understand what the goal of it was because it was painted.
I think it's a technology. I think it's a technology demonstrator.
Gotcha.
I think that it is something that GE produced. No, GD, General Dynamics.
Yep.
Probably produced because Russia is talking shit about this armada and like how badass it is with all of its compartmentalized crewless turret and huge gun, and I think maybe it flies too and probably has missiles and whatever bullshit. So I think it's something like that where JD or GD is like, yeah, sick, like, but we could actually make it, and like, here's what a real next generation tank looks like you idiots. So I think Abrams X, I think it has a larger cannon. I don't remember. I know that it does have pretty. I know it has like a chain gun on the turret, which I thought was very funny. So I don't know. I don't think that it's. I don't think the need for that vehicle exists. I think that there's nothing that it does that the M1A2 can't do equally well. But it is cool, and I also believe that the United States has the ability to actually produce that vehicle if it desired to, which I'm sure pisses the Kremlin off quite a lot.
So you think it's kind of it's going to be like an F8, F-15 example where we overproduce or maybe overcompensate because we're terrified that we're being outperformed, and it turns out that it's a mulligan.
I think that we did that. I think we did that 40 years ago, right? Because the T-72 is supposed to be like a wonder tank. It's amazing, revolutionary vehicle, and like really not to talk shit about the T-72. It is a good tank. I think it gets a very bad rap because it has this unfortunate problem of incinerating its crew if it takes any damage. So that's obviously not good. But besides that, it's a very capable platform, and if you are not getting hit, which should always, be high on a crew's list of priorities, it's a very effective tank. And I point to that when people talk about how bad Russian tanks are. The Ukrainians are essentially using the same tanks, and they are getting much better results from them. So, yes, the T-72, the T-Series tanks all have this flaw, a design flaw. But if you have a competent crew who knows what they're doing, and you're not putting the vehicle in ridiculous situations like driving it into lakes or driving it into mud, and you're not getting hit by weapons that were specifically designed to exploit the flaw of the T-72, which is that if any damage happens to the turret, it turns into a volcano. It's a very good tank. But I think the original question is, like, have we over-engineered? Have we overreacted? Yeah, like we did, but we did it 50 years ago. And we're still so far ahead that we don't really need an upgrade to Abrams. If I was going to do anything to Abrams, it would to address the threat of ATGM, and whether that is in like an active or passive defense, it just has to be addressed. Being able to, from the tank, counter an anti-tank guided missile, it's a must-have, and it's one of the reasons why people like my friends like to give me shit. Oh, Marine Corps got rid of tanks. That make you feel pretty bad, right? No, I actually agree with the decision, and one of the main reasons is that M1A1, which the Marine Corps operated, is not survivable, in my opinion, against a peer, because there is nothing on it that is going to protect you from a top-down attack. You're just dead. You have no chance. So the Army has the ability to field these upgraded versions, which have the reactive armor that we can't carry because it makes us too heavy to be expeditionary. You can't put all that shit onto a vehicle that already weighs 70 tons and then put them on an LCAC or drive them off a boat and the numbers that you need and operate them in close with the infantry like Marines trained to fight, because the armor, the reactive armor, is a threat to anybody who's dismounted around it, right?
Yep.
So we can't have any of that. So taking that vehicle into a pure fight, not a good deal. It was like not something I was excited about when it was my job. And now that it's not my job, I am glad that no one else is going to be asked to fight that fight. When we send men and women into combat, they should have the best equipment. They should have the right equipment. And if they don't, I think it's fucked up. I shouldn't have said that.
You're fine.
I think it's messed up to ask people to do that.
Did you say women in combat?
Yeah, that's the part I meant. I shouldn't have said. That's not the curse words, but the idea of women being able to do the things that men can do. Just blasphemous, evil, cursed thought, and I apologize for speaking it.
I don't have enough sleep or enough whiskey to go into the culture wars today, so we'll
let's skip that. I do want to make sure that everyone knows I'm joking.
Oh no, of
I don't
course,
think that there's anything that any woman can do. Like guys so tanks was all men, right? Very quick anecdote. All male MOS, no women whatsoever. At the very end of my career, there was a discussion about opening. It wasn't a discussion, actually. Congress said women will be in tanks, and the Marine Corps was very pissed off about it.
I remember.
But I remember, having a discussion with some of the troops, and they're like, "Oh, like, can you believe it? Women are going to be like, dude, you're here, and you're like the weakest person I've ever seen. So I don't know what you're talking about. It's this one dude. I won't name him because that would be mean. But somebody who really struggled to do any of the physical things that are required on a tank, which is basically everything, because everything on a tank is very heavy. So I'm like, dog, like, are you you have this opinion right now? Like, are you for real? Are you for real? Like, you think that women are not strong enough? Like, I think you should not be here, brother.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, that's how I feel about that. I don't want to hijack your podcast.
No, man. This is an open convo. I've said it online many times. I've had many of the same conversations, and I said, if you can't outpush them, I don't value your opinion. I don't. And even then, I still probably don't value your opinion. But anyway,
it's an interesting, segue though. It's been noted by a number of people that Ukraine does make significant use of women, including in combat roles. It's not super widespread that they're in the combat roles, but there's a ton of Ukraine, but they are there, to be clear.
Yep.
But there's a ton of Ukrainian women in support roles. The Ukrainian medical system for the military would not run without women. And in contrast, Russia basically doesn't do it at all. They've done a few photo shoots. They've sent a couple people in brand new, clean uniforms and fresh makeup to take pictures, but it's not a thing that they do. And I do think that is increasingly going to be a thing worldwide. It's that a nation says we're in a struggle for our existence. If you hold a rifle, you're joining up.
Right. It's a necessity.
In a way, yeah, and in a way that, a lot of people have argued against it. Again, I won't go into the war, but I do think it's in the interest of national security that you say if you are an able-bodied individual. And Ukraine is certainly in an existential crisis where they don't have the room to exclude people. And I do think that's a lesson that has to be learned going forward. I keep saying this, but God forbid a war with China. China is probably not going to shy away from using every available body if they think that it's a threat to their national existence. So it's kind of mind-boggling to me that Russia has not done this, that they have continued. And I understand it's a very chauvinistic society, especially in the military. But I mean, at some point, you got to wonder, what else could we do? And maybe conscripting a large workforce of able-bodied humans might be high on that list as we struggle to recruit a large workforce of able-bodied humans.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it'd be hard to say that it's only a special military operation. It's not a war if they start, grabbing women and conscripting them. I think that's like a significant alteration to the propaganda that it's not actually a war. But I don't know. You're right though. I've seen a lot of medics, especially a lot of combat medics, and it is a segue and a half. That's probably a whole other episode that would get really spicy. But I've worked with hundreds of women. They've done badass things. They will probably always do badass things. I don't care about the opinion saying otherwise because I've seen it. So whatever. But
shitbags and weak people exist in both genders. It's not something unique.
Yeah, exactly. Since we're on the tank conversation though, the M10 Booker, I really like the M10 Booker because I've been talking about this for a while now about that we haven't had a light tank equivalent like I believe it was the Sheridan in Vietnam. We haven't really had an equivalent like that in a while. I'm kind of curious. This might be more of a Matthew question, but Faust, I'm sure you have familiarity with it. But I'm kind of curious your take on it. Is this something that the Marine Corps is going to be interested in? I haven't really looked from that perspective. I only saw that it was handed to the Army in like November or something. But I'm curious your guys' opinion on it. I'll start with you, Matthew.
Yeah, I like it. I think that a light tank makes good sense. And I know the Army doesn't want to call it a light tank. I think they're calling it a combat vehicle, right? They don't want to say that it's a tank.
Stupid, yeah.
Yes, I saw tank Army Twitter getting into just a very boring conversation. It's a tank, fellas.
Yeah.
Like, it has a cannon, it has a turret, it has tracks, it's armored. That's a tank, guys.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to tell you. Cry about it if that makes you feel better. No, I think it's a great idea, and I think that the Marine Corps should have a vehicle like that. I think that makes good sense. I think that having armor protected firepower attached to a battalion landing team is good, right? Like, I don't know how you could make the argument that it isn't. And I think that you could get more of them into the fight than you could get with Abrams. Like, I'll be honest, Abrams in the Marine Corps never really made good sense. It was too much tank. Like, we call Abrams a main battle tank, right? Which is supposed to be in this area between a medium tank and a heavy tank. But Abrams weighs more than 70 tons. Like, it is a heavy tank.
Yeah.
It's a very big tank, a very heavily armored tank. And it was a little bit too much to say, to really justify. But I think that something that's fast, light, maneuverable, like the Army's new tank, makes a lot of good sense for the Marine Corps to have. I don't think the Marine Corps will buy it because the Marine Corps does not like to spend money on new equipment. I think the AAV, their assault amphibian vehicle, is a great demonstration of the Marine Corps, like, almost taking pride in operating the shittiest equipment available. So, I would not hold my breath for the Marine Corps to acquire the M10, but in 20 or 30 years, when the Army is moving on to something else, I bet you will see the Marine Corps adopt it.
It just seems like it'd be a great fit for amphibious.
It is. I think it would make a lot of sense, and I think that it would replace a very valuable asset that the Marine Corps did lose when it divested itself of its tank battalion. But again, it's going to be money. Like, at the end of the day, everything with the Marine Corps is about money and space. So right. The Marine Corps has gone in the direction of these littoral combat units with their missiles, and I think that makes great sense. I'm a big Papa Burger stan, so I know that's divisive. I know there's a lot of old Marines got very upset, wrote some really nasty things about Papa Burger in our trade magazine.
Well, you got to
explain what that means.
You got to explain what that means to the non-Marines, though.
Papa Burger, sure.
Yeah.
General Burger, he's the commandant of the Marine Corps, and he, in his force plan, one of the many decisions he made was to get rid of tanks and to build a lighter, harder-hitting Marine Corps that would be able to fight in the Pacific. Our like actual job that the Marine Corps is supposed to have, rather than being this sort of bloated second army. Mm-hmm. So that made a lot of people really upset. A lot of generals, I think even I think maybe one of the prior commandants, you'll have to correct me if I'm making things up, Faust, but we're unusually loud about it, because typically the Marine Corps won't engage in like bickering, like sort of prides itself on being professional and not. It's just a very conservative organization. So the level of just complaining and attacking the current commandant was something I've never seen, and I don't know if we'll ever see it again. But it was nuts. And anyway, I think he's right. For the reasons that I've already discussed, that Abrams was not a good fit, and that it didn't make sense for the fight that the Marine Corps is most likely to become involved in, which is campaigns for islands in the Pacific. It just didn't make sense to be hauling around Abrams, which is so greedy with logistics needs, right?
Yep.
You need the parts, you need the fuel, you need all the stuff to keep a tank unit operating, and all of that comes at a cost, right? Like, those are supplies that are no longer available, and that is space that's no longer available for the infantry, which is the main effort in the Marine Corps. That's the base. The base unit is the infantry, and everything else exists to support it. So to take away from that, for tanks that, like, what are you even going to do with them on an island? It doesn't make sense.
Gus, do you have something?
Yeah, I'm actually super hopeful that we acquire them. I'm a little more optimistic that it'll be more like 10 to 15 years. I think he's absolutely right. It has to become a proven technology, and it has to start being built at scale before the Marine Corps will even touch it, because it will be, I mean, it's going to be super expensive in general, but initially it can be even more expensive. Once this is a proven tech, it's been adopted Army-wide, I think absolutely it makes sense for the Marine Corps to buy them. And I think that in fitting with this kind of change towards this lighter, more streamlined force, it might make less sense to have them as their own battalion. It may make more sense to put, a platoon or a tank company in an existing either infantry battalion and make them just organic to the infantry battalion, the same way that we have with other vehicles, or to make specific infantry units that have a large proportion of their vehicles being the M10 or a similar vehicle. I think a lot of people said when the Marine Corps first divested of tanks was, we've divested of tanks before and then brought them back. And that there's a high likelihood that a future vehicle gets adopted again. And to touch a little bit more on Papa Berger's plan, Force Design 2030, a lot of the changes that people were mad about were just changes that they made. If you read them, they make a lot of sense. But they changed the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps is extremely resistant to change. And so saying we're going to have less cannons and more HIMARS, they ignore the more HIMARS part and they just focus on less cannons.
Yeah.
I think one of the other changes was they stripped it. I don't know if it was an entire regiment, but there was a removal of infantry and a refocusing of infantry elsewhere. And the total numbers end up being about where, Congress kind of said we should be. But it's a restructuring. And I think that Marines, especially Marines who were there while it was structured differently, get very upset about change that they personally didn't agree with, as though it was anathema to the Marine Corps itself, as though we haven't changed repeatedly over the last, 100 years especially. And I think a lot of the changes that were suggested, because this plan goes back 5 years, I think, a lot of those changes are being proven in Ukraine as good ideas, that your small units should have an unbelievable amount of firepower with them because they might be the only thing that's there to fight. And how many videos have we seen of Ukrainian soldiers that are out there with just unbelievable combat loads because they're bringing, their personal loads, their radios, AT weapons on every member of the patrol. It fits that kind of light force that hits really hard. And Ukraine is a perfect example of when you have a bunch of little light forces hitting hard, you can move mountains.
Yeah, no question. My biggest concern, that you guys both said the same thing, though, is that if the Marines don't want to adopt the technology for 10 to 15 years or after the Army does, it's gonna be a little bit too late. If the estimated timeline, let's just say, God forbid, we hope it doesn't happen, but if China wants to take Taiwan by force and we want to engage, it's gonna be way too late for that. I would hope that they would maybe it's probably gonna be closer to that date that they'd be like, oh well, shit, maybe we actually should do this. But I hope not, because that'll be a bad day.
I think it's more likely you see plans for the Army being integrated with the Marine Corps at smaller levels.
Yeah, I was curious about that too. I heard that theory floated around, and if you told me that a few years ago, I'd been like, no way in hell. But now I'm kind of wondering if our roles, kind of like you said, the Marines adopted this, coin based warfare for the last 20 years, which went away from what you're built and bred for, And I'm wondering if the Army, I've been kind of open about the fact that the Army needs to be willing to cut ourselves, via budget or whatever else, to complement the Navy, Air Force, and Marines, because let's be frank, they would be doing most of the fighting in the Pacific. Granted, Army would, operate coastal artillery, which is being brought back, intelligence, all that fun stuff. But infantry, I don't know. Maybe. But it's an interesting thought. Was there anything to read, like any reports that made you mention that, or is that just kind of like a guess off the top of your head?
So that it is just kind of floating around in my head. But the Army talking about for the last 2 or 3 years now, just a reminder, we have all of this amphibious equipment. We do actually have small boats. We do actually have equipment that could be used for amphibious ops. It was something I hadn't really paid attention to, and I do think the Army kind of lets it sit on a back burner. I know a lot of that equipment just sits in harbors somewhere. But why would you have that if it wasn't to augment the Marine Corps? And I certainly think that was the Marine Corps' hope. If you're seizing small island chains, you probably don't need Abrams. But if Taiwan, you absolutely would need Abrams there. And I think that's kind of the Marine Corps' hope. And I'm theorizing.
Sure.
But I would assume it's their hope that we can turn to the army and have those tanks there in short time.
Okay, interesting.
It certainly goes back to our history of shared combat with the army.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, everywhere you look, every war we've ever fought. So, and I would hope so. Matthew, anything to add to that before I move on?
Nope, nothing further.
Okay. Well, that's kind of like all the questions I had as we're nearing our hour and a half mark here. So what I'd like to do is just kind of open it up to you guys. If there's anything specifically that has been of interest to you lately that's sticking out, you'd like to chat about, I'd love to hear from you. But Faust, how about you? I know we talked last time about some things you were working on, but anything lately that you want to go over, or any questions that you have for me, God forbid?
I know we've hit on this a lot today and a little bit last time too, but I'm really interested in an academic work, hopefully when this war ends, which hopefully is soon, on the actual role of Ukrainian drone program and just how impactful it was. Because, I mean, back of the napkin network or math says, we're looking at several hundred Russian vehicles destroyed outright, and probably another 100, 200 more destroyed after they were abandoned by these drone programs. And then, I think initially we're looking at this as, a couple dozen vehicles here or there, not enough to like shift the war. But when you begin to talk about division-sized units disappearing, and obviously that's an aggregate, it's not like one single unit is getting hit, that is war-altering. It's hard to imagine in a war where Russia's lost over 2,000 tanks at this point. Several hundred of them came from drones. That's incredibly impactful. Mm-hmm. And I do wonder what works are going to come out academically when this war is concluded, because this is the first war in history that is documented at this level. I mean, I can't imagine how much more difficult it had to be to come up with those sources and then be accurate pre-cell phone age. But I mean, man, there's just so much information, and I think that we're going to get just an unbelievable amount of good and bad analysis that comes out on like, what worked, what didn't work, and what was the quiet hero. Because I still think people are addressing drones as like, they're there, but they're not that important. They're just flashy because they get videos of everything. Right. And I think that, like, realistically, Ukraine could have been in a much worse position if they had not had these effects. I don't think. I would swear that Ukraine would be in a much worse position if they had not had the ability to erase hundreds of vehicles with off-the-shelf drones.
Oh, 100%. That's why like crowdfunding is what some external people might think is kind of silly. Like in this case, it's pretty impactful. Like that one drone can do a lot of damage and provide quite a video for us all to look at later.
Yeah, I think that's for folks who aren't familiar with it, like NAFO, right? North Atlantic Fellow Organization.
I thought it was NAFO, man.
I think.
Come on, NATO.
I like to do whichever one that you think is right. I'll say the opposite of it, just to keep you guessing.
All right.
So, like the hippopotamuses, I'll just go the other way to be contrarian.
All right, fair enough.
So, what did you say? You said NAFO, right?
Yeah, because NAFO.
Yeah, good. So I'm going to keep saying NAFO. So right. NAFO, right? Like, I think a lot of the attention of what they did is on the idea of it being counter to Russian propaganda, and about trolling and this kind of thing, which is true, that occurred. But what I think is the part of it that deserves more attention is the crowdfunding, right?
Yep.
Like the work of actually gathering money and sending it to units who need it, and letting them buy the equipment that they need to prosecute this war against Russia. And one of the things that is funniest to me about it is that we saw Russia trying to do the same thing. Like they very desperately wanted, not like, evil NAFO, right? But like they wanted their own network and community of fundraising and people who are going to do the same kind of commentary. And what they got was like a bunch of grifters who were stealing money.
Yep.
And I can think of examples of Donbass Davushka, right, who turns out to be some maniac from Iowa or New Jersey or whatever, pretending to be a Russian woman, and who seems like she gathered thousands of dollars of donations and contributed them to herself, which I think is actually very based. Like I support. I'm a Donbass Davushka stan. I like that. That's funny. But there's other examples where Russians tried to crowdfund for drones, and again the money got stolen. Like that's very funny. They are unable to do the same kind of thing, and I think we were talking earlier about the disparity between Ukrainian off-the-shelf drone use and Russian off-the-shelf drone use, and that's got to be a key component of it, right? Like they just can't get them in the same quantities that Ukraine can, because they do not have the support system to buy them for them, through sanctions and through the fact that whatever is going on with Russia culturally, there are just a lot of people who steal, and I think that is like a just a fact of life almost, where their crowdfunding, their charity drives just end up being theft. Yeah. So I think it has an impact, and we're able to actually see it.
No question.
We talked about this a little bit last time, but Ukraine had a reputation pre-war for corruption, and Zelensky was elected on an anti-corruption platform. And I think that whether systemic change has happened or not, they've made a very, very strong case publicly to denounce corrupt, anyone who's running a corrupt fundraiser, and because there's been a couple instances on the Ukrainian side. And to just be transparent, which I think makes fundraising easier. Like NAFO has done, well, I'll adopt his. NAFO has done hundreds at this point, and most of them are not so much that NAFO is running them; it's that we're spotting them and boosting them. I mean, just to use one example, Konstantin, I can't say his actual handle, but the man has probably fundraised hundreds of drones at this point, and God knows how many thermal sites and whatnot. And he's been super transparent about it all, which gives people a good feel. It makes them feel like their money is actually going where it's supposed. I mean, it's like fundraising 101.
Right.
But it's happening in a way that everyone early on was saying, oh, they're just going to steal the money. They're just going to steal the money. Ukraine's so corrupt. And they've been very, very, above board with it. I mean, the government of Ukraine has worked with NAFO. And I think everyone is kind of, part of it is they're in an existential crisis. I know I keep using that word. I got to find another one. But it is in everyone's interest that the money get to the units that actually needs it. And that there's faith and trust in the units and the people that are doing fundraising. And you have this group of amorphous people from all over the world that are kind of helping to identify those groups. And yeah, to Matthew's point, Russia doesn't have that. And I like the kind of people that they're attracting aren't going to be the kind of people that can recreate that.
Right.
And that is probably one of the things that I could have least predicted about this war, was the enormity of fundraising opportunities having an impact like that and being sustained. We're 18 months later and people are still giving money weekly, monthly, boosting these new ones, starting their own. It's mind-boggling. Yeah. I wish we'd had this for Syria.
Yeah, no kidding. That is actually a good point. Like, it is a little unfortunate. I get it though. I get it. Like, there's some context here, right? Like a major land war on Europe, of course, it's going to attract more attention for certain groups. Like, of course, but Syria is it's just in a lot of shit right now. So it's good to bring attention back to what's going on there as well. There's one individual I follow. I've been trying to retweet a little bit more often lately to make sure it's not left in the dark.
I think to some extent it's human nature. It's an unfortunate part of human nature, but I think people are most attracted to helping things that look similar to them. Not necessarily just, race-wise, but like a way of life that you're like, identify with that. I get it.
Right.
Where they may not have that same context in another country, especially where less English is spoken. It is a form of soft bigotry that you say this group of people is deserving, and this group of people I'm just not going to pay attention to. But I think it's an inescapable part of life, and the best thing you can do is continue to call attention to the great orgs that are in Syria, the Syrian American Medical Society, and stuff like that. And the other part is that people are more easily able to identify who the good guy is here. In Syria, it was more murky. There were people fighting the Assad regime that weren't good.
Yep.
There were people fighting the Assad regime that were tied to ISIS. And so it was a much harder information environment where this one has not been.
True. Very messy indeed. Well, I appreciate it, gentlemen. I personally don't have any other questions for you. Again, unless you have any last minute questions for me, which is always a scary thing because I didn't script those, so I'm not emotionally or knowledge ready. But anything for me before we part ways?
No, I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on again. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah, no, it was great. I really appreciate your insight. Matthew, how about you?
I got nothing further for you. I likewise appreciate the invite. I don't do a lot of podcasts anymore, so it was fun to come on and chat about stuff that I care about. So thank you for the invite, and I hope I wasn't too boring for your listeners. No. Sorry, guys, if I was.
No, not at all, man. Trust me. They're probably still trying to Google the plural name for hippopotami to make sure what the actual answer is, if we're being honest with each other. But no, that's great. Again, gentlemen, I really appreciate your time. I'm sure we're going to be talking again here soon because there's just a lot to talk about, and it's a rapidly evolving world right now, right? And I'm looking forward to the next one. But for now, again, I appreciate you, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Sounds great.
All right, guys.
See you later, brother.
Thank you.